There are 6 of us here today who will tell you about some of the projects we've been working on to bring our collections out of the vault and into the hands of our users. They will answer questions at the end of the presentations, so as questions come up, please feel free to post those in the chat. This program is being recorded and will be shared after the event. I'm now going to turn it over to our first speaker, Elizabeth Batyuk, who will introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Zach. So I am Elizabeth Batyuk. I have a PhD in ethnomusicology and an MSI from the University of Michigan, and I am the new curator of performing arts collections here. I started in July, and I'm so delighted to be here with you to share some highlights of some of the latest acquisitions and modes of access that we're providing. Zach, are you controlling the slides?
I am, so just tell me when you'd like me to advance them.
Okay, great, thanks. I thought I was clicking on the advance arrow. Okay, yep. The performing arts collections constitute approximately 10% of the special collections in the Special Collections and University Archives Department. The majority of those are music, but we also have radio and TV, theater and dance. Our historical collections include ones from the Grand Ole Opry, from WSM Radio, ones related to the Metropolitan Opera Company in New York, folk music in the South, and music pedagogy. You can click move on. Recent acquisitions to the special collections, and especially in the performing arts, have been mainly through a very exciting collaboration between Vanderbilt University and the National Museum of African American Music, a new museum in downtown Nashville. We have added 7 new collections, and this 5-year grant program will be running for 2 to 3 more years, and it is composed of an academic archive purchasing fund and an arts discovery and innovation fund for programming. We also have new acquisitions from private donors and some upcoming ones which you will be hearing about. The NAMAM collaboration has resulted in the acquisition of collections related to Janet Jackson, Reese Palmer, Otha Turner, a group of hip hop posters, Yusef Lateef, and John Dizzy Burks Gillespie. Also, the Don Flemons collection is the newest acquisition in this array of exciting music collections. I'm going to be speaking about the Dizzy Gillespie collection and the Yusef A. Lateef collection today. Just to review, I know we all know who Dizzy Gillespie is from his name, but I'll give you a couple interesting facts about the significance of his role in jazz. He was a principal innovator of bebop, or modern jazz. He was a virtuoso instrumentalist, and some of his most famous tunes include Groovin' High, Salt Peanuts, and A Night in Tunisia. MSS 1000, that is the manuscript number that we have assigned to this collection, and one way that you could locate it among our collections consists of a very large, rich collection of photographs, as well as audio recordings, scrapbooks, and what we here refer to as realia, but most people just call objects or material culture. Next slide, please. I would like to share some images with you today from Dizzy Gillespie's first scrapbook of his tour as a jazz ambassador. The Jazz Ambassador program was started in the 1950s by the U.S. State Department, and Dizzy Gillespie was the first jazz musician to form a band to tour on behalf of the U.S. government. It was in its very successful tour that improved America's reputation abroad and was a template for subsequent tours. Jazz represented the sound of freedom around the world during the Cold War and in post-colonial nations in Africa and other parts of the globe. Some of the locations, I've listed some of the locations that were visited. These pages show photographs that Dizzy took while he was in Lebanon and Abadan, which is an Iranian city in the oil producing region of the country. And it's really wonderful to see like where Dizzy was looking around while he was on tour. Next slide. One of the musicians who worked with Dizzy Gillespie in his early years as a performer was Yusef A. Latif, who was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and died in 2013 in Amherst, Mass. Latif moved from Tennessee and grew up in Detroit, where he met many of the innovators of modern jazz and played with them. In 1948, he converted to Islam, and in his later career, he really centered his activities around ethics, learning, and teaching. He was a very important pedagogue, and many of those papers and manuscripts related to that activity are in the papers that we have in the Latif collection. He also devised the term audiophysiopsychic music as an alternative to the label jazz, extending that idea of the freedom of jazz as a kind of personal expression. MSS 1034 contains scores, audiovisual materials, correspondence, teaching and research materials, publications, and musical instruments. Next slide. I'm sharing here some images of some of the musical instruments in the Latif collection. A Shehnai, a kora from West Africa, and a sitar from India. Latif was really interested in non-Western approaches to music and had ties to both West Africa and India in his personal and intellectual life. Next slide. One of the pieces or manuscripts that was composed by Yusef Latif we have in the collection is Romance for Harp and Soprano Saxophone. And among the audio recordings that are in the collection is a recording of this piece of music. Are you going to let us hear a little bit of it, Zach? Whoops.
Yep, I will. Just a moment.
So I'm going to talk a little bit. Oh, here we have it rolling. Thank you. Thank you so much for letting us have just a little taste of that. And if you could go back to that other slide for one moment, I just want to make a comment that this piece is going to be on the program of a concert lecture given by the Buchanan Library Fellows, December 7th at 7:30 p.m. at the Blair School of Music. And I want to draw your attention to that link at the bottom of the, to that link. And if you give me the slide after next, I want to tell you about a really exciting resource that is coming soon. That link will lead you to the aviary repository in the Vanderbilt digitized collections. The aviary project is rolling into the beta phase. We're going to be testing user experience, delivery, and preservation. It will be accessible to people with a Vanderbilt single sign-on and linked through the library catalogs and the finding aids to the resources listed. Aviary is a platform for streaming audio and video for research institutions, and it is providing access to previously inaccessible materials because it can control access for ethical, copyright, and research reasons. And one of the challenges we have in offering access to audio recordings is the huge variety of old, obsolete formats that they come in, which would make them inaccessible otherwise to listeners. But this way, through streaming audio, you're going to be able to access the Latif recordings, the Dizzy Gillespie recordings, and a wide array of other audiovisual materials from our collections. Thank you so much. So glad. And this is how the interface would look when you access the Dizzy Gillespie collection. And each one of those boxes represents, you could click on that, open up the description, and a place to click on the media player and listen to the files. Thank you so much for your attention. If you have questions, you can email me directly at elizabethkbatuk@Vanderbilt. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Next, we are going to have Sarah Berg.
Hello, thank you for attending today. I currently work on the Lamar Alexander Papers with Mary McSparran, and she will discuss these later. I process the Delia Zapata Olivella's physical papers and AV materials, and today I'm here to provide context for the significant collection, which will be available online later in 2023. The next slide, please. The Delia Zapata Olivella Papers document the life and work of a woman credited with preserving Colombian folklore and educating Colombians about the Spanish, indigenous, and African influences at the root of their folkloric culture. Born in rural Colombia with Afro-Indigenous heritage, she valued the worldview of the underrepresented. Throughout her career as a dancer, choreographer, ethnographer, and professor, she shared folk histories, attire, instruments, and movements from across Colombia. The digitization of the Zapata Olivella papers allows Colombians and people around the world to look around and learn about Colombian folkloric culture. Her papers contain clippings, essays, teaching notes, musical scores, costume design, and audiovisual materials. Next slide, please. I'd like to provide a taste of what Delia Zapata was accomplishing with two short videos. The first video is from a performance at the International Folkloric Festival. Sorry, let me give a quick introduction and then I'll say when. Her dance troupe introduced Colombian folkloric performance globally, including multiple destinations in Europe, the United States, Russia, and China. The clip here features La Danza del Garabatos from the Caribbean coast of Colombia. The dancers here represent life expressed through vibrant choreographed movements and traditional attire. However, once the skeleton figure Death shows up, the battle between life and death ensues. Let's watch the beginning of this Sword Against Scythe video. Great, thank you. So the battle begins here, and I suppose you can guess that death wins in the end. The dancers' celebration of life, despite death's presence, reminds us that we can have joy even though we face the same fate. The exaggerated moves and makeup demonstrate a stage presentation made to reach a large outdoor audience, and this was performed at a folk festival in Italy. The next video, if you'd like to go to that one, and I'll tell you when to start. The next video features footage from the Pacific coastal region of Colombia, where you can see storytelling and musical traditions as part of everyday life. The story here is called Granito de Oro, which is a funerary song that celebrates a child's ascension to heaven after untimely death. This type of vibrant cultural heritage is what Delia translated into stage performances around the world, like the one you saw in Italy. The movements here are subtle, and the dancers do not rely on costumes or makeup to express the joy of life and promise of a peaceful afterlife. The traditional instruments played by the adults are complemented by the young boy who adds layers of rhythms with his makeshift percussive instrument. This shows the flexibility that comes from performances offstage and the innovative ways people come together to make music. If you'd like to show that real quick, thank you. Great, thank you. I'm sure our curator of performing arts, Elizabeth, could add more layers of meaning to these movements and instruments. So stay tuned for her analysis sometime soon. Let's move to slide 5. To conclude, the Delia Zapata Olivella papers contain more AV materials like these videos, as well as stage performances and audio recordings of folk music. These, along with her papers, will be available later this year. And thank you for your attention. Feel free to email me with any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we are going to have Katie Grant.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm project archivist here in Special Collections with quite a few different projects going on, but the one that I'm very excited to share with you today is our digitization initiative for the James Lawson Papers. For those of you who might not be familiar with Reverend Lawson, he's a wonderful leader and in the Methodist Church, but most importantly, I think, was his major roles in the American Civil Rights movements in the 60s. He is a huge proponent and educator in nonviolent action, which is what you see here, him teaching. And he has some strong connections to Vanderbilt because he was here as a divinity student between 1958 and 1960, and in 1960 helped coordinate and create the National Lunch Counter sit-ins, and as such was actually expelled from the divinity school. So we're very lucky that we now have been able to repair that relationship and we have his papers here. Next slide, please. Reverend Lawson's collection includes documents, papers from his various degree programs, undergraduate and divinity school work, and an immense number of photographs from his travels, his work in the Methodist Church, and in peaceful protest and nonviolent action. They were processed over a few years ago, and then this summer we spent some time working with an outside vendor to have everything two-dimensional, all the photos and all the papers fully digitized and scanned and then sent back to us on hard drives. What many people think is that once we get everything back, we're done. We can put it up online and it just sort of magically happens. I'm here to tell you that that is unfortunately not the case. It's a lot of work to get it from hard drives and the physical collections being returned to us up into a format that we can share with you, whether it's video and audiovisual material or if it's these papers and photographs. We worked with an outside vendor starting back in April is when we sent everything out to them. Everything was returned towards the end of July. And then we began the work of making sure that everything from our physical finding aid matched not just the physical collections that got returned to us, but also the digital files that correspond to those physical records. We have to examine everything. We have to put it all back either physically on the shelves or digitally in the right folders, and then upload it to JSTOR. If you want to go to the next slide for me, Zach. So this is just, we'll give you a little taste of what the JSTOR site will look like. But this is another really wonderful photograph of Reverend Lawson. And then let's see. There we go. So if you are on Vanderbilt's campus, like Elizabeth was saying earlier, or have a single sign-on, you can actually access our JSTOR Community Commons page, and you can see all the collections that we're working on getting digitally available. So down here, we have a special landing for the Reverend Lawson Papers. We can click on that. And it'll open up another page. So there's two different ways that you can really look through these kinds of things. And it's the same way that you would look through a finding aid. We have different series like biographical and personal information, correspondence, writings about Reverend Lawson. And we will have many more of these as we continue to finally finish digitizing and uploading them and publishing them for you. The other way that you can access things is by searching, which is up at the top of the screen there. And Reverend Lawson had a very close personal and professional relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King. So if we type in Martin Luther King and search for that, it will pull up anything from our metadata, so all the information in our finding aid that corresponds to anything related to Martin Luther King in the James Lawson Papers. And right now you can see that there's different correspondence about honorary lectures, events, newspaper articles. There will also be photographs. The photos are towards the end of our series for the Lawson Papers, so they're not up quite yet, but they will be soon. You can search this way and find a whole lot of different things related to Dr. King that you may not have realized were something that he worked with Lawson on, or Lawson gave a talk in Dr. King's honor. or about their work together in civil rights and nonviolent action. So we can hopefully go back to the PowerPoint now. Reverend Lawson's career was and is a really wonderful showcase of a variety of things that he did. One of which, this is one of our favorite photos here in special collections, was his travels throughout India in 1960. So stay tuned for more. And if you have any questions or would like to request any of this digital material, please don't hesitate to reach out. The wonderful thing about it being digital is that we'd be happy to send it to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Katie. And now you guys are going to hear from me. And at some point, I'm going to do the same thing where I exit out of the PowerPoint for a moment and go and browse some of these. Like I said earlier in the intro, I am Zach Johnson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Imaging and Preservation, which is actually a new department here at the university in the library, where we are focused wholly as a department on imaging materials that are really high quality, both our archival materials and library materials. Supporting faculty digitization efforts, either through training on things or creating high quality images for them as well. And then finally, making sure that our collections are preserved and made accessible. So all these collections we're talking about today, we all work very closely together to make sure that these are preserved and made accessible in a good way. Two of the collections, though, I'm going to talk about today are the Commodore and the Vanderbilt Hustler. The Commodore and some of our other yearbooks was an internal digitization project that we actually did a couple of years ago, where we looked to digitize all the issues of the Commodore, Comet, and the Pillar, which is Peabody's yearbook. So in total, we have hundreds of years of yearbooks from Vanderbilt's history, which has been really great things for us to get. Because of the speed at which we tried to go through and really create these, because of the yearbooks are things that are probably some of our most used resources. They have their own special shelf down in the vault for people to come see them. We have every copy of the yearbooks, and they get used very often by alumni or interested researchers. And so that's why we really wanted to focus on doing an internal project to make sure these got digitized. And because of that as well, we went through and we did these very quickly. So the quality is not as good as it could be or as good as some of these other collections are, but it's still relatively good. And so one of the advantage now of them being on JSTOR, and I'm going to stop sharing as well as we do this, is that, like Katie was saying, they're now completely searchable when they're online, and you're able to download any of them. So I'm going to go back to the homepage here. So the Commodore yearbooks, and these specifically, are within our Vanderbilt publications page, and all these are linked on our special collections homepage. And there's a link there to a digital collections page, which talks about all of our digital collections, one of which is the yearbooks, as well as the other collections on JSTOR. So if I go here and I go to the Commodore specifically, I will see all 109 issues that we have of this issue. And the great thing too is, again, that I can do broad searches and find things, wherever volleyball, for instance, appears on the Commodore, which might have some interesting uses. Generally, you should be able to search for individuals as well, which I think will be really appreciated by our alumni and those that are interested in Vanderbilt's history. But special collections, if you ever have any issues, is always able to provide a higher quality scan of any of the pages you need, because again, we have an issue for every one of these yearbooks. You'll see we also have 22 issues of the Comet, which was the predecessor to the Commodore yearbook, and that goes back to 1887, as well as 3 decades worth of the Pillar, which was Peabody College's yearbook before they became a larger part of Vanderbilt. So really, these are just really great resource for alumni and interested researchers, I think. The second resource I want to talk about is the Vanderbilt Hustler. As many of you probably already know, the Vanderbilt Hustler is Vanderbilt's student newspaper. This was one of those collections that over the spring and summer we sent off to a vendor, along with many of these other collections, to be digitized. You'll see down here at the bottom the sheer size of this. I mean, 2.5 terabytes of files. we really just, our digital collection size exploded this spring and summer with all these projects that the university funded. But the Hustler was a big priority for us because it's one of our most requested things from the archives. Again, just kind of like the yearbooks, because it's such an incredible lens into Vanderbilt campus and Vanderbilt's history, because you have news articles and reports from the entire history of the university written by the students, for the students, about the students. You know, it's just a very on the ground, interesting bit of material. It has all been digitized. It is all back with us. We have digital copies of metadata for everything. But like Katie was saying, there is a delay, but until we can get it online. And so the goal is to have the Hustler available on JSTOR Community Collections as well by January 2023. And one thing I'll note about the Hustler and Commodore specifically is that those do not require you to be on Vanderbilt's campus to access them. Those are freely available anywhere in the world. So users should be able to find those and search those freely. And we have agreements with the university and with the publishers of the Hustler as well to make these things freely available. I will say though that for now, like Katie was saying, if there are specific requests that we can fulfill for specific issues, I can't do a full text search like we'd be able to later, but if there are specific issues, we should be able to provide those to you while we're waiting for these to get fully online. And for our next presenter, I think we're just about to talk about Lamar Alexander. Senator Alexander has been one of our customers here, where we have provided him with his issues from the Hustler when he was editor. So I just think this is going to be a really great resource for alumni and those that are interested in Vanderbilt's history. So next, we're going to have Mary McSparren.
Thank you, Zach, and welcome everyone. My name is Mary McSparren, and I'm the new curator of manuscripts here at Vanderbilt. I would like to give you an update on the progress we are making with the Lamar Alexander Papers, which is our largest manuscript collection. Next slide. So as Sarah Bird and I approached processing this collection last fall, we started by completing a collection survey. There are 475 memorabilia items in the collection, including a wooden box full of foreign money from Alexander's time studying abroad in Latin America during his years as a college student here at Vanderbilt, where he was a Latin American studies major. There's also a bronzed walking boot from his walk across Tennessee, and a myriad of buttons and banners from different campaigns throughout his career. There are 2,855 audio-video items in the collection. If you could show that video. So this video shows just walking down the aisle with all those AV materials organized on the shelf. There are a lot. And I will talk more about those in a minute. There are also 710 linear feet of papers. You can see some of those boxes in the picture on the left. And those papers include clippings, correspondence, administrative materials, handwritten notes, meeting agendas, and more. There are also about 30 linear feet of photographs, 28 boxes of oversized materials, and a large amount of foreign digital materials. Next slide. After getting an overview of what kinds of materials this collection includes, Sarah and I started digging into the boxes and organizing what we found. Zach and our university archivist, Kathy Smith, had previously processed large portions of Alexander's pre-Senate years before Sarah and I started, but the senator continues to donate boxes, and there were about 100 bankers' boxes of what we called unknowns, which contain a mixture of materials from all different periods in his life. It was vital to get a sense of the chronology so that we could arrange everything in a cohesive manner. Here are the series we have settled on: childhood and education, early career, campaigns for governor. He was a two-term governor of Tennessee, chair of the Massey Leadership Institute at Belmont College, president of the University of Tennessee, secretary of education, his presidential campaigns, his time in the Senate, and retirement. Next slide. Here is a screenshot of the collection finding aid, which is available online. You can see those series I just listed over on the right-hand side, and I can put that link in the chat if anyone would like to take a more detailed look. So this online finding aid is helping to improve accessibility, as researchers can now search, find what they're looking for, and request materials to be viewed in our reading room on campus. Next slide. We are working toward making everything digitally available so that people can potentially access materials from anywhere in the world. Katie outlined the digitization process for the Lawson papers a few minutes ago, and the process looks very similar for this collection. So back to those AV materials, which I mentioned earlier, there are almost 3,000 of them, items in the collection, minus a few hundred duplicates, which we weeded out. And those include interviews, campaign ads, family footage, and broadcasts from the Republican Exchange Satellite Network, which is the TV network Alexander created in the 90s. Last September, I went through the 129 bankers boxes of AV materials, weeded duplicates, and created an inventory of those items. We sent those out in February to be digitized and have started getting the files back. I've uploaded about 1,000 of those files into Aviary, our audiovisual platform, which Elizabeth shared about earlier, and we will be rolling that out in the coming months. So this is an image of the Aviary landing page for the Alexander collection. And we are now preparing the paper materials for digitization and plan to send all of those out and have that completed, the digitization completed by 2024. And as Katie mentioned, it will be a longer process once we get all of those back to upload them to the online access platform, JSTOR Community Collections, and link them to the finding aid to make them digitally available. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will keep you updated as we continue making progress on the Alexander Papers.
Thank you, Mary. And for our last speaker, we have Phil Nagy.
Hey, thank you, Zach. All right. Afternoon, everyone. I am Phil Nagy. I'm from the Digital Imaging and Preservation Department with Zach. I've been here at Vanderbilt since 2007. I work really closely with special collections and the university archives to digitize a range of items, images, documents, publications, memorabilia, films, video cassettes, everything from university history records to rare books for all researchers here at the university and from other organizations. The biggest part of my job is researching, organizing, and digitizing the Vanderbilt University Photographic Archive. So special collections, we have about 300,000 photographs that cover the history and development of Vanderbilt since its founding. That was in 1873. There are more than 20,000 images from George Peabody College. And so that covers their early beginnings as the University of Nashville right up to the merger with Vanderbilt in 1979. So let's have a look at a few of these photographs. So this photo is of the main building, kind of got a generic name before they named it Kirkland Hall later on after one of the chancellors. This photo was taken in 1875. It's one of the oldest photos of campus. So these old photos were used by Vanderbilt researcher Steve Baskoff, who's actually now at the library, to identify the campus's oldest trees for the Vanderbilt Arboretum. And so you can see how he's identified the various trees around campus, figuring out which ones are still there, which ones are gone, how old they might be. So that was a really fun project. All right, and so these two gentlemen here, they are at the June 1925 reunion. So Doctors Goodlett and Moore, they received two of the first diplomas from Vanderbilt, and they graduated in February of 1875, about 7 months before Vanderbilt opened for classes. So that was the result of a collaboration with Nashville Medical College at the University of Nashville and Vanderbilt. So they had jointly operated the classes for about the previous 5 months. So the graduates could choose diplomas from either school, or for an extra fee, they could get both diplomas. So, all right. So early on, Vanderbilt was a proponent of organized collegiate sports in the South. So in the 1880s and 1890s, you can see here baseball and cycling, they were the popular campus sports, but there was little coordination, lining up opponents or setting the rules. So William Laughlin Dudley, chemistry professor, he's here in his office. This is about 1908. He was elected the first president of the Vanderbilt Athletic Association by the students in 1889. And he started to get this really organized. So by 1894, Dudley and Vanderbilt had taken the lead in organizing 20 Southern schools to form the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association to codify these rules, with Dudley as its first president. So member schools of that original athletic organization spun off later to become the Southeastern Conference. And today, the SEC is a football powerhouse. I get a lot of requests for football photos. So in 2009, I started organizing, researching, and scanning these, entering the metadata into our photo database. So everything from organization all the way up to metadata entry. And so it's a 3,300 image collection of nothing but football photographs. We also recently got a transfer from the athletic department that has expanded the holdings by many tens of thousands of images. I still don't know exactly how many, but I've got them organized. And if somebody asks for something, I can find it. I prioritized it because people asked for it. And so now I've ended up with more than 100 boxes of photographs and thousands of videos. And so we've got Vanderbilt's sesquicentennial coming up, and internal demand for items relating to all kinds of Vanderbilt history is skyrocketing. So we got an early start. We collected hundreds of resources for the university community to use. And we continue to research, organize, scan, and preserve all of our wonderful collections and present them for research digitally and, in exciting new ways. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. So that concludes our presentation. And now I'm going to ask Celia Walker to help us moderate some of the questions that might have come in the chat. And I'm also going to I'm going to stop screen sharing too, so we can see everybody really well.
Thanks, Zach. So please, if y'all have questions, add them to the chat. I have a couple of questions I really wanted to start with, and that was, I'm curious about how you decide which collections you digitize and make available. It seems like you've got so much. It'd be hard to figure out which ones you would take first.
I think I'll start there if that works. Just having worked in this for a couple of years as curator before Mary did that. And I think there are two main avenues. One, we have our library priorities. So the library sets out, each year its goals and what kind of initiatives it's going to support. And so some of that is really focusing on our EDI efforts and making sure we're building up our collections that address issues of diversity and equity issues. And then other times there are university initiatives like the sesquicentennial. So you have instances of where Phil is going to have a lot of work this year around that event. And then finally, I think that we could all say that the other thing we want to do is we want to digitize things to get the most use. So if things are going to be heavily used, like the Delia Zapata Olivella Papers have been, we get huge international demand for these collections. The chancellor, has given us a new priority to, expand our international impact. And so this is a big collection for us. So we also look for those kind of collections too that are just going to be used by the most number of people too. Because the thing about archives is these are fragile materials, and the more people that come in and handle things, each one of those uses is potentially damaging the material. So having them online and available not only protects the materials, but it also expands access.
Thanks. The other question I had was, how do you decide which collections are shared globally and which are shared just with the campus? It looks from the JSTOR that you have some things like the Hustler that are available to anybody, but others that are not. Could you explain a little bit of that?
Sure, I'm happy to, unless somebody else wants to as well. Maybe Elizabeth, since you have a lot of copyright issues with some of these music collections.
Sure, I can comment on that briefly. Yeah, providing access to audiovisual resources is often a little bit complicated in terms of copyright issues. And what campuses are covered by is a policy under copyright called fair use. So fair use is for educational uses and for researchers. So researchers and people in educational institutions have much more leeway to access copyrighted material. But if collections include commercial content, usually that's a little bit more complicated to share broadly with the public. And as I mentioned with the Aviary platform, it provides kind of levels of access depending on copyright and ethical issues, but it does provide access to fragile audio-visual carriers and obsolete media, which we would otherwise be unable to offer because you need a separate like literal player, like a record player, or different kinds of phonographs, or different kinds of video players, or projectors, film projectors, and it just wouldn't be feasible to have and maintain the whole entire range of equipment for the entire range of possible formats. And so it really solves a lot of access problems that otherwise plague audiovisual collections.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I think the only thing I would want to add to that about some of our 2D object collections that we've also digitized is that we try to follow this model, kind of like if y'all are familiar with the Vanderbilt Television News Archive, which has documented 50 years of evening broadcast news from CBS, ABC, and those kind of places. And they have a huge archive that has all the video clips that they've recorded for decades. But clearly the networks still own these materials, and they're still in copyright. And so it's actually a Supreme Court case, and that Vanderbilt Television News Archive was involved in the 70s. But what has come out of that, and the effect of that, is that we feel very comfortable sharing these copyrighted materials on campus, because then it's assumed that the primary use there is going to be educational or for research, and we choose things that are out of copyright, or where we have special copyright agreements when we choose to make those available to the general public. I have a question, if that's okay. I think for Katie. Katie, you have not been here very long, but you have spent a very long time working on the Lawson papers. And I'm curious what some of the lessons that you've learned from that we can kind of take forward, and as we move forward with some of these huge digital collections projects, like things that we need to be aware of. And I'm curious if you could just share some of your experiences with that.
I think the biggest thing is time and how long it can take to process these things correctly on sort of the digital or the back end, as we're finding. So as Zach mentioned, I'm probably the newest person to the department, I think. I started here the first week of August. I started working on Lawson, I think on day 3 or 4. And I've worked on it for at least a couple hours every day since then. So it's been a really big project. Working with outside vendors to digitize 2-dimensional materials is crucial to us being able to make a collection like the Lawson papers available, but it does come with its own set of challenges. We've learned a lot about how to set parameters and what kinds of things that we want to make sure we emphasize in terms of this, checking the backside of sheets of paper, for example. So we're having to catch a lot of mistakes that were made, but they didn't need to happen. And opening that line of communication with the vendors we use will be a huge boon to resolving those kinds of issues and stopping them before they happen with the next project. On the sort of campus restriction conversation, the other thing I've learned about through Lawson is the amount of sensitive material and personal materials that can be in some of these wonderful archives. This is a civil rights collection. This is amazing and crucial for us to be able to share and utilize. But at the same time, Reverend Lawson was a pastor with an active congregation in multiple locations. And part of what came in with this collection was his correspondence with some of his congregants. And we not only have a duty to share his civil rights work, but a duty to protect those individuals who are writing some very personal letters to him. And he was helping with some very personal family or professional struggles. So it's a complicated question, and we try to approach everything with sensitivity.
I'm wondering if it's harder to work with living donors, right? So Mary and Katie, you both are working with donors who are involved in their collections. How does that work?
Well, I can start with that. It has been a delight to work with Lamar Alexander, who's very involved in this process with his collection. He's actively doing research using his own papers, and so he comes in fairly often to the archive, and Sarah can speak more to that just on he'll request photocopies or scans of materials, which is something that Sarah has done a lot of, so thank you, Sarah. And he's using those materials to create his own work, so I'm hoping he'll keep working on that, and that we'll get to see the results of that one day. And I think if there have been any challenges, it's just that it's important to stay flexible when working with a living donor, because this is his collection and he really cares about these materials, and we want to make sure that we're taking the same care with them, and just keeping him in mind as we move forward and make sure we're communicating well with him. So I think it's gone really smoothly, and I'm grateful for his presence during this process.
I can add a little bit onto that. I came in August, which means that this collection, the Lawson papers, were processed by one of my colleagues. So I was not part of the initial work through of the collection. And it's been a steep learning curve for me to learn about what's included and how to approach it and everything. The other part of this is that these papers have been processed for a couple of years now, and so people can find the finding aid and request things, including the Reverend and some people that he's working with on some other projects, which means that while I'm trying to make sure we have everything properly digitized, people are also requesting materials to be viewed in our reading room here on campus, which is an interesting challenge because it does sometimes slow down the process, but we don't want to restrict those materials for people who are looking to do research with them. We're here to make them available, and that's a really important part.
I wanted to add one more aspect of working with a living donor, and that is the ability that we've had to do oral histories with him. So as we find materials that are interesting and believe that we could know more about them if we had greater context, we're able to ask him. And that's really nice to help with processing and also with gathering more history to go with the materials. So that's been really nice. And also, keeping us on our toes when he requests something, we get to test our system immediately and make sure that we can find whatever he's looking for at the drop of a hat. So.
Great.
Sarah, I'm going to stick with you. Oh.
I've got one question in the chat,
Yeah.
if that's okay. The attendee asks, how have you dealt with accessibility issues with the visual items that you're making available online and audio?
Sarah, you were recently working on this, so I'd love it if you spoke to this, but I know that it might be a thing I have to answer, but I know you were kind of investigating this recently.
Sure. I know that some of the accessibility issues that we have, as we've discussed, involve the copyright. So making sure that the materials are protected is really important, but also making sure that things go up in a proper, keeping with our workflow, and making sure that we think about creative ways in which we can share our materials. For example, the videos I just showed you are just tiny clips that I had placed on YouTube, and that gives us a little space, to promote the library and make it searchable for people who are not involved in the library system. So that has been an innovative way to connect people with these materials.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we have tried to do is adopt softwares that address some of these accessibility issues for us, either through algorithms and AI or things that make it really easy for us to adhere to some of those federal standards. So if I think of like aviary, one of the benefits and what we really want to try to do is make sure we have transcripts for as many of our materials as possible, for our audio and video materials. We're doing that as well with some of the things we get. We have seats in various softwares that allow us to get at least relatively good transcripts of things. But then also I think dedicating student time and things like that to ensuring that things like transcripts are done properly. And it's not just, we're not only relying on things to be done automatically, but we are actually dedicating some staff time to some of that. But that's one of the things we need to use when we evaluate our digital collections tools, is making sure that they are aware of the new guidelines around accessibility, and do things that can help us achieve that. I think, and one other thing I want to add to that too, and I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else you want to add, but an interesting thing that when I think about like the Delia and Manuel Zapata Olivella papers, is that these are Colombian collections, like at their core, and so it's very strange that they're here, Nashville, Tennessee, kind of locked away from some of this international audience. And so the fact that we've been able to digitize these and we put resources into making these available online freely, I think suddenly we're finally addressing some of those equity issues that come about when a predominantly white institution has not taken a collection, but there's complicated reasons for how we have acquired these things. But thinking about providing access to Colombians and other international researchers that don't always have the ability to make it here to Nashville to work with these collections. And so I think that our efforts around that and really pushing collections that address that impact or have that impact has been something we're working towards right now to address some of these equity issues.
We've had one more question, and that is, were there any surprises in the collections?
Phil, do you want to? Phil, you scan a lot of stuff, so I'm just kind of curious what some of your thoughts are for surprising and interesting things you've come across.
Yeah, I guess the first thing that jumped out to me was when we got the athletics videos, we got their whole field kit. So we got wasp and hornet spray, we got some sunscreen. What else did we get? There's something else, but yeah, it was the entire kit. So yeah, they got repurposed where they could. And the other thing is when you get these obsolete media, especially with AV materials, like Elizabeth said, you have to make sure that you have something that you can play it on. So when you get the collection, it's really important to look through it and say, hey, you gave me these kind of cassettes and I need a player. Do you have a player? Please don't throw anything away. Just let us know if you have it, because we need that in order for anyone to ever watch it again.
There were some surprises among the audiovisual materials from the Dizzy Gillespie collection, because we have a lot of interviews with Gillespie from different jazz radio programs, and we have rehearsal tapes and we have concert recordings. But actually, we have also a few little tiny gems of some candid recordings of Gillespie just speaking with his friends. And you can catch these kind of glimpses of him in these very casual, warmly affectionate moments with other jazz musicians who he had personal relationships with. And some of that was just sort of a delight to stumble upon as processing and uploading them into the platform. So
I was going to add that with the Delia Zapata Olivella collection, one of the joys that I had working with those materials is that I could see, how she was presented in newspapers, the types of interests she had in creating costume design, and the types of music that would be represented in sheet music or in programs. The programs would give descriptions of the dances and things like that. So as I was going through the collection, I got little bitty pieces of what these dances were, the folkloric history. And then once I got to the AV, I got to see it all come together. I got to see the costume, and I'd seen it designed. I got to hear the music that I had the sheet music for. I got to see the movements that come from the different regions and notice, in the hot region, the attire is much less than when you're in the cold regions of the country. So, it was just kind of, it unfolded for me. And if you have any interest in any specific part, you can find from the very beginnings of it all the way up through the finished project, if you are looking for something through the collection.
I'd just like to mention as a user that Phil's scanning is so high quality. So high quality. If you look at some of those images that he's done, say of Kirkland Hall when it was Maine, you start to see things in it because you can blow it up so much that you didn't realize before. So there are African-American workers that are pictured in that scene that we don't have any information on. And it's a way to find things that maybe are gaps in our collection. It's exciting for me, and Phil, your work is just so outstanding. It's what makes it all possible.
I think Melinda had one other question, and then I think we're probably at time. She asked how do you record that we got sunscreen and bug spray in the kit? You know, is that something that we might record to keep for a future researcher, so they could know?
I did not make an inventory of the bug spray and the sunscreen. I gave it away to people who needed it.
I'll jump in for just a little comment on that. As we are doing some revisions and reparations and just emphasizing different parts of the collections, we are revising some of the records in the database archive space, which is where you can find the finding aids. And in those finding aids, there are actually spaces to put a few notes about the interventions that the archivist has made. And so we're putting in those notes as we make revisions. We note revisions to the description and revisions to the collection in the finding aid.
Well, thank you everybody so much for attending, and thank you to all our panelists for speaking on your topics and sticking around to answer questions.